and 624 deaths as of yesterday. And alarmingly, there are 1,809 persons in home isolation. Now, it's interesting to know because at home isolation, you're expected to wash your hands with soap and water before and after eating and after using the washroom or the toilet, to cover your cough and sneeze, dispose of tissues, use alcohol-based hand sanitizer, avoid contact with others, and remain the 3 to 6 feet difference. And you would have known that in some cases, the persons would have gotten 24 hours water. Now it has now been reduced to 12 hours. In some cases where there were 12 hours, it has been reduced to 4 hours. And some persons just intermittently. And so here we're talking of washing your hands and sanitizing with decreased water, let alone soap and others where there is skyrocketing of the goods in the market. So it's really, the diners are really in a dilemma. And so far, also, there are 1,933 active cases. 34 persons in the COVID-19 hospital, which was quoted to accommodate 27. I heard the minister says he's going to try to accommodate 40, and he will make that to the maximum capacity. They are putting the cart before the horse. I would have thought that COVID would have been sometime now, and they would have put all of that beside that, have a comprehensive plan, so that rather than thinking about it ad hocly and after the fact, now they're thinking of what the ICU should look like. Be that as it may, the Guyanese citizens are aware that COVID-19 hospital was made operable by the former APNU AFC coalition government. So thanks to the APNU AFC government for such foresight, forward thinking, and insight. Now, what do we know about COVID? Several theories that have been put forward with varying suggestions, such as its origin being from a wet market, to zoonotically being transported to man via minks, as in Denmark and the pangolins, to even contamination by the food chain. And now we are hearing of gain of function approach from the researchers, where scientists use animal viruses to affect humans or mutate animal viruses to affect humans, thus creating superviruses. The latter proposition is engaging the attention of scientists and researchers now. However, at this juncture, all of that is beside the point. I will compare that COVID 19 is with us, and that COVID 19 anywhere is a threat to COVID 19 everywhere. The threat is very real, as some of us have witnessed it in our own family. At this press conference, I will make 3 points that affect the Guyanese citizens. Firstly, this government continues to act unilaterally as it makes personal decisions that involve the Guyanese citizens. It was Dr. Theodore Ghebreyesus who said us at home, this COVID-19 pandemic can be pushed back, but only with a collective, coordinated, and comprehensive approach that engages the entire machinery of government. The World Health Director noted that though COVID-19 is taking so much from us, it gives us something special, the opportunity to come together as one humanity, to work together, to learn together, and to grow together. The WHO Director reported noting that the greatest drivers of COVID 19 is lack of solidarity and sharing. Now, the National COVID 19 Task Force, NCTF. The task force has failed of being a preventive service task force. It has failed to address the inequities in healthcare delivery, as seen in the administrative region, Region 6, when compared to Regions 4 and 10. We would have seen in Regions 4 and 10 just recently, as in this week, nurses, field workers have been locked out of the gift from the tertiary or one and only tertiary hospital when compared to Region 6, when the converse was true. There has been little or no community engagement and cross-sector approaches as staff members from the popular sectors are unable to work from home or utilize the rotation system. I am positive that the task force does not understand that there is a direct relationship between a person's health and socio-economic circumstance. Though systemic racism is evident, I challenge the government to work systematically to change the systemic racism to inclusion and consider the social risks, such as the impact of non-employment and the lack of transportation, which have been found to improve health outcomes. In other words, the welfare of citizens I'm talking about. I'm simply saying that the task force should give preventive service and address the social determinants of health. It has been established from time immemorial that vaccines are important, powerful, and effective public health tools for the fight against COVID-19. So you will recognize I'm on to vaccines. So the first point I want to raise concerns the National COVID-19 Task Force, and now I'm on to vaccines. The main objectives when vaccines are considered are safety and efficacy. And in Guyana, the types of vaccines that are available, I was made to understand, include, in no particular order, AstraZeneca, Sputnik V, Sinopharm, Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson and Johnson or GSK. We have seen from social media fabrication, misinformation, and disinformation about the vaccine. I will reiterate that information concerning anyone's health should come from credible and reliable sources and must be evidence based. Hence, we should follow the science and debunk the myths. The APN Youth Coalition has been saying three main concerns or concerning the vaccine. One, that we are not against persons being immunized. As you know, the opposition leader and myself, being the shadow minister of health, have gone to various parts of the country to encourage persons to be vaccinated. As COVID-19 has now become as the pandemic of the unvaccinated. To that effect, I traveled to Linden. It happens I was told to be one region of the lowest uptake of vaccination. So I traveled there with Nurse Cummings. Nurse Cummings happened to be the nurse who became famous. She was the one that administered to the U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris, her vaccine. She was here in Guyana and in Linden to motivate citizens, especially healthcare workers, to get vaccinated and to prevent serious COVID-19 infections, hospitalizations, and death, and by extension help to reduce the large burden of disease and the health crisis. As we have noticed now, there are several variants of interest and concerns, including the Delta variant and now the Mu variant. They've all been reported to be transmissible, very transmissible, and remaining at a more or less a level of nasal pharynx. But also there are also variants of concern that they may be evading the immune defenses. Though the APNU AFC coalition strongly recommends that the populace takes the vaccine, we are saying that it should not be mandatory. Even though there is a rush to herd immunity, the Ministry of Health should not coerce or mandate an action or behavior to interfere with an individual's liberty and autonomy. They should seek to balance communal well-being with individual liberty, as they are suggesting that there be a compromise. According to WHO, they have adopted a position that neither endorses or opposes mandatory COVID-19 vaccination. Rather, they have identified important ethical considerations and caveats that should be explicitly evaluated and discussed through ethical analysis by governments and or institutional policymakers who may be considering mandates for COVID-19 vaccination. So the World Health does not seek to support the direction of mandates for COVID-19 vaccination. I would argue that it is better to work on information campaigns and making vaccine accessible. In other words, the government and the Ministry of Health should seek to educate the public, educate the public about the vaccines and encourage the voluntary participation freely without fear. There must be ongoing communication to ensure compliance. We know there are conspirators, and their theories, we know that. We know they are manufacturers. But I believe from the depth of my heart, most persons, especially healthcare workers, they are neither manufacturers or conspirators. They are demonstrating some forms of vaccination efficacy. I will not sit here and lie that there have not been any death cases of COVID-19. The studies have shown that in the United States, 64% of these captured persons who had breakthrough infections over the 65 years and may have been immunocompromised. So I've spoken about the national task force, I've spoken of vaccination and mandatory vaccination by authoritative. And thirdly, I want to speak about our collective position that vaccine alone is not a solution. There must be a holistic approach to protect public health, and we must consider our health in terms of our diet. There's an acronym that I use, the New Start Principle, where we look at our nutrition, the green leafy vegetables and healthy eating, just promoting healthy eating. We look at our exercise, going out in the sunshine, basking in the sunshine, avoiding crowded spaces, you know, because the place is so extremely hot, your liquidity, try to have some more liquidity before you increase your water intake, take a lot of fresh air, try to rest, have 6 to 8 hours of sleep, and of course, whatever you believe in, trust in divine power. So, in other words, what I want to say as I close my statement, Guyana would want to achieve herd immunity, but not by violating the citizens' fundamental rights, the peaceful protest, to choose to refuse and to deny them informed consent. With the data rapidly changing over the efficacy of these vaccines and the disturbing adverse effects being reported that vaccinated can both die from the vaccine, both the vaccinated and the unvaccinated can die, and also they can spread and become infected with the COVID-19 vaccine, the variants of concern. It will be untenable to promote mandatory vaccines or unleash harsh treatment and punitive actions on that subset of citizens who may prefer not to be vaccinated. So I implore each citizen to practice the 3 W's, to wear your mask correctly, fitting properly in your nose and through in your mouth all the time, every time. To maintain watch your distance of the 3 feet to 6 feet, and to wash your hands as often as possible with soap and water or sanitizer. If you many water, you can wash your hands. I will also promote and add mental health and counseling services to the mix to safeguard public health of the citizens. So I just want to reiterate that although you may be taking the vaccine, you need to boost your immunity. Each person must boost his or her immunity by the diet, with some herbal foods, a lot of organic foods. So, as a Christian, I know true science and the Bible agree. Coercion is not science. Withholding data is not science. Manipulating data is not science. Cherry picking is not Social conditioning is not science. Fear mongering is not science. And pharma propaganda is not science. So with these words, I thank you. Fear mongering is not science.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cummings, for your statement. I'll now invite Dr. Nicholas Henry to um, present her remarks. She will address specifically the issue of the planned reopening of the school year. Dr. Henry?
Amen, and thank you, and good morning to colleagues, and good morning to all media personnel on this platform, and to those listening to us here in Diana and beyond. This morning, I joined with colleagues to have this press conference to raise awareness of some of the worrying trends and developments that we're seeing here in the country. I happen to serve in the education sector, former minister, and therefore I would confine most of my contribution this morning to the education sector. And so I begin by saying it is a grave concern to the coalition that the government is strongly opposing the reopening of school in less than 1 week. At the same time, when the same government is struggling with the escalation of cases here in the coronavirus. So right away, we're seeing that they're operating from two extreme ends, none of which would be in the best interest of the people of this country, or none of which can result in anything positive for the people here. But in keeping with the reopening of school, there are a couple of things that I would want to touch on, and I trust that the media, in their responsibility, would definitely have quite a few questions for the government as it relates to the safety, health, and well-being of our students, teachers, and all stakeholders that work to make the education sector function. And so, if schools are to be reopened, as is being touted on the 6th of September, there are quite a number of precautionary measures that, at least at this point in time, it would have been at the minimum acceptable thing to do was to engage stakeholders at least a week in advance in some of these precautionary measures. And the first thing I want to talk about in terms of precautionary measures has to do with the rearranging of the sitting. Because given the social distancing protocols, we would expect that students will not be overcrowded in the classroom. And these rearranging and sitting arrangements need to be put out there in advance. You can't wait until you get on the ground, students and the teachers, and then figuring that out on the first day of school, because that will have serious consequences. The other precautionary measure that needs to be out there in advance has to do with timetabling. Are we to believe that all of the students are required to show up Monday morning when school reopen? Who are the students that will be identified? What is the system that will determine who will be going? How will they be notified? The public needs to know that. The students certainly need to know that, the parents. And then in terms of developing plans for the use and distribution of basic equipment and materials that are needed to sanitize the schools. And such as the temperature check devices and washing stations. That brings me to the whole issue of preparing schools for reopening, even outside of COVID 19, would require some amount of infrastructural work, most of which we're not seeing in terms of putting up, you know, hand washing bays and all those things. We're still to see that. We've seen some painting of other places from green to white. We happen to see painting of schools also taking place in preparation of the reopening. We're talking about deploying staff to clean and disinfect and sanitize school buildings. And these ought to be, and these to be done prior to. And so, in addition to the regular cleaning, the ministry in this instance should be looking at services for professional cleaners so that they can ensure that the level of sanitizing, sanitation, and hygiene principles that are required are all met. Then coordinating the training of staff and students on implementing the various measures. That needs to be done prior to. Developing a monitoring mechanism to ensure that the precautionary measures that are put in place are never compromised. On the second point I would want to touch on in terms of precautionary measures will be coordinating with parents and other stakeholders to ensure that transportation providers ensure the safe movement of our students to and from school, where there is transportation support for students and families who may have, financial challenges brought on by COVID. This should be communicated, this should be handled, and so the ministry needs to say something about that. There also needs to be a modified arrangement for the provision of meals. With students be running outside to buy meals during this time, we don't know. We heard about teachers will come up with an individual plan. Whatever plan is being determined for schools in this country, every child must have access to and be a beneficiary if they are in school of the precautionary measures that are outlined by WHO. It can't be left up to anybody to implement their own standards and their own precautionary measures. And the last one I want to touch on is preparing a space and appropriate protocols to isolate and treat students and staff who may become ill or show signs or symptoms of the COVID-19 virus while at school. And so for every school that is reopened and every school that has its door open, they would need at a minimum to have these 9 precautionary provisions in place. And these are not things that happen after or at, they are things that should happen prior to the reopening of school. And so it does concern us in the coalition that we're not hearing about these precautionary measures that should be in place prior to. And therefore, we call on the government and the Ministry of Education to ensure that they, they communicate to us, the people of this country, what are the specific plans for the reopening of schools in a time when Diana is seeing an increase in the number of cases daily. I conclude with those words, and I am certainly more than happy to have discussion and questions that may arise out of my statement in the next few minutes. I thank you. Over.
Thank you very much, Dr. Henry, for a comprehensive statement on the issue of COVID and its impact on the education sector, specifically with respect to the planned reopening of school. I now invite the Honourable Annette Ferguson, Member of Parliament, to add her remarks before we take this question.
Thank you very much, Ibrahim. A pleasant morning to you, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen of the media, and those listening and viewing us across the social media platforms. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, you will agree with me that COVID 19 is real and has become unmanageable by the People's Progressive Party civic regime since August 2nd, 2020. I also want to take this opportunity in reminding all of us that when the first case was discovered in March of 2020, and at the time we had one death. At the time of the APNU AFC leaving office on the 2nd of August 2020, you had 21 deaths as is compared now today with 624. Under the APNU AFC, you had 474 cases as is compared now to 5,770. So that in its sense is saying to us that this particular pandemic has become unmanageable under the People's Progressive Party. Civic. As members of the main opposition party in the National Assembly, we are on record indicating to the regime that we are ready to work with the regime to collectively combat this pandemic, which is currently being mismanaged by the people, by the People's Progressive Party regime. I want, just before I end, I want to add by making these plea to the regime. We in the APNU AFC, we are ready to be consulted. We in the APNU AFC, we are ready to have representatives with the experience, competence, and knowledge to participate on the National COVID Task Force. Therefore, I end my brief statement by joining my colleagues in calling on the People's Progressive Anti-Civic regime to put aside petty politics and move ahead in governing this country in the interest of our people and also to ensure that we fight this pandemic together so that the lives of our people will be safe and secure. Thank you very much, Imran and ladies and gentlemen of the media. That is my brief statement um, on this press conference this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anthony Ferguson, for your statement. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now move into your questions, and we will take questions first of all as regards the various statements which have been presented, and then if you have other issues which you would like to raise with the National Authority, we'll be happy to take a few questions on those issues. So if you could use the raise hand feature to indicate that you want to ask a question, we will move. I see Svetlana Marshall, Village Voice. Svetlana, go right ahead.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I have about two questions. One to the former health minister. Dr. Collins, could you say, I know in the past the opposition would have raised concerns about the Sputnik V vaccine. Could you say the opposition would have received all necessary clarification? And what exactly is its position now on that vaccine that's being administered by the government? And I know that you mentioned a number of measures that could be taken, like wearing masks, sanitizing, and things like that. Uh, the new COVID-19 emergency measures or the updated measures were released, I think, yesterday or the day before. What the opposition position on that? We've seen increased capacity being given approval for increased capacity and restaurants and so forth. What is the opposition assessment of those uh, updated measures? And to the Dr. Henry, could you say if the opposition or yourself would have attempted to reach out to the Minister of Education or the Ministry of Education to ascertain the level of preparedness, what exactly is being done on the ground? And if you haven't been able to do so, if you've been able to reach out to the teachers union or teachers or have done your own assessment to determine exactly what is happening on the ground.
Thank you, Svetlana, for those questions. We will ask Dr. Cummings to respond first, and then we will take the question, responses from Dr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Imran, and thank you for the question. Of course, during our debate it was pointing out with me if things they experience the public place make understand that there was a shady deal when it came to this PPP. You would have known it came from a man and exorbitant price because he was able to secure the million extra money that spent on procuring that vaccine. We haven't gotten any response. Of course, we have written extensively. The opposition leader was hired, despite the Minister of Health being intervention. But up to now, we haven't gotten any response to that. Publicly also, as you know, we would have preferred that most of these vaccines are being used for companies because we want to know first that it should be WHO approved. So far, public reading has not been approved by WHO. It was positive that maybe later this month it will be approved. Of course, it will be used in other countries, about 70 countries. But in terms of what we want to do is something that's credible information, we want to interview from CDC and WHO. And so far, they have not approved that. I know CARICOM has approved traveling, and on CARICOM, you can have spotting if you approve the travel. I know I heard that from I think it's 1 week or so. Um, so that's where it is. And as we are in that, so we're talking about mandatory vaccines, spotting B and all these are nothing approved should not be. I mean, how could you? These drugs are under emergency investigation and so on, so they shouldn't be mandatory. And so I've seen they have more or less played that down and they have since dropped Pfizer and J&J, which is one dose. Of course, we have our Imperial and others, so we have the mining here, and some of them are nomadic, so J&J I guess would be appropriate for that. But in terms of, as we speak, the only drug I think, the only vaccine that is FDA approved now, I think is the Pfizer. So if there's any kind of literally if we can go that route, which is the Pfizer, the others are not are still on investigation and they're version 2. The second question as it deals with this the public health measures is as we see it's worsening. The situation in the crisis in Guyana is worsening. One would have thought a good sense would continue and with a take the Ministry of Health and the scheme would have taken a step back and some introspection and say, okay, where are the gaps here, problems here, let's see how put our minds and main, not unilaterally, but let's work together in a coordinated fashion. How can we improve the situation? So here we are, there's an uptick in cases, skyrocketing the deaths and the confirmed cases and isolation as well. And with no proper guidelines of the shores to say that these are the things you need to do. Um, in addition to that, we have noticed that 60% capacity. So the super spread, they'll continue to be super spreading events. So you have now the business places and the casinos and so on, and over 60%. So I am it's very appalling to know instead of us go to tighten up, as we see the rain and work on this thing, follow the science. Here we are, here, so I don't know. It makes me wonder if there's something sinister, if there's going to be the more cases we have, the more funding we're going to have. I mean, it lends itself to all sorts of speculation, you know. So, and coming to that, I mean, even sometimes as a former minister of health, I am trying to get some information to find the analysis, the disaggregate the data things, so how many in terms of ethnicity, in terms of age, in terms of location, we're not having that to have a proper analysis of the situation, So it's all they're interested in just numbers rather than identifying what the causes are and what problems we have so we can fix them. So it's really, I mean, I guess we have to get what it gets better.
Thank you for your response.
Thank you so much for the question. As it relates to if we as a coalition would have reached out to the Ministry of Education and to the government, I want to say yes, we have reached out. As you know, as a coalition, we as parliamentarians, would have asked a number of questions through Parliament, and as former minister, I did ask a few questions myself related to and directly related to the reopening of schools, among others, and also the measures that are being put in place to ensure that we continue to educate our students. Having said that, I would like to say that we continue to reach out. I would even like to use this platform as a means to reach out again to the Ministry of Education and to the government. I can tell you that from my observation and from what I have been following and what is in public domain and what would have been said to me, that these measures that I spoke about, these precautionary measures, are not in place. And I want to give you one reason why I can say that without fear of being contradicted as it relates to the preparation of our teachers to go back into the classroom. It is the Ministry of Education who admittedly said within the last 48 hours that they expect that 50% or thereabouts of the teachers will go back to work. So if you require more teachers to be on board and you're operating with a capacity of half, 50 or less, and from my own thinking and from my own observation and my own information on the ground, it's going to be less than 50, given the where the discussions and activities are where the union is concerned. So that in itself will tell you the level of preparation that can take place, that will take place, if at all, and how prepared they are. So you have to be able to put your ducks in a row, so to speak, and make independent analysis yourself. You don't necessarily have to just go with what Nicolette Henry is saying, because at the end of the day, there is enough information in the public domain. There is enough happening that we should be concerned. Every right thinking person ought to be concerned that school is about to reopen in Guyana when there is an increase in the number of cases in the country. Because that should concern you because of how the infection is spread. And you know that the Delta variant is very contagious, and there are high numbers reported among young people, and students are that age. So that should concern you. The second thing that should also concern you, and where you don't have to have specific data, but you have to be knowledgeable of your country's profile, and that is we know that it's children from the age of 12 who are being vaccinated. But schools are not opening only for children who are 12 years and older. And we know that vaccine alone is not the end all to getting this pandemic under control. The precautionary measures are also very, 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 very important. And so if those things are not happening, if those if those structural things that exist are not addressed and structural interventions are not put in place, then we can clearly see where we are going. And we're colliding, with unfavorable outcomes at the end of the day. So that would be my response to your question. And again, I want to close this response by saying that I would even want to use this platform as a means of reaching out. I thank you. Over Imran.
Thank you very much, Dr. Henry. Sean Embra of Stock Radio Embra Waves has requested. Sean, go ahead with your question.
Thank you, Imran. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we are. Go right ahead.
Okay. I don't know who will take the question, but it's a response to what the Attorney General, Mr. Anil Nandalal, said last evening. He said that the opposition politicians are responsible for driving the lawsuit that the union had filed against the government against mandatory vaccination and restricting public servants and citizens who are unvaccinated um, from accessing public services. That's one. And it's assertion is that the opposition stance on the mandatory vaccination will be the detriment of Afro-Guyanese and the coalition's base, especially against the background that the statistics are showing that persons ending up seriously ill in the hospital are mainly Afro-Guyanese. What are your responses to these statements by the Attorney General?
Thank you for your question, Sean. I'm not sure if Dr. Henry or Dr. Cummings are going to respond. Of course, any response would have to be with extreme caution until any any of Dr. Henry or the Cummings were going to respond. We have had an opportunity to actually listen to um, whatever it is that the Attorney General um, said last evening before he completed. Dr. Cummings or Dr. Henry or first?
Thank you. And I put at this point proper an initial response from the coalition. And first of all, I'd like to say, thanks for the question. Secondly, I'd like to say that I have not had the opportunity to listen to those sentiments that were expressed. Having listened to them, we will give a more detailed response. But initially, what I can tell you is that the union, they have always been independent, and we're certainly supportive of the union's independence to bring these various actions in the court. And like every other guidance, we would trust that the outcomes of them would be to the improvement of the working conditions of the people here in this country. And so we will certainly prepare a much fuller response when we've had an opportunity to look at these statements. And I thank you for bringing it to our attention. Thanks again.
Thank you, Sean. Is it done?
Imran,
Go
Imran,
right ahead. Go right ahead, Dr.
no, not Dr. Cummings. This is in preference.
I apologize.
Okay, thank you very much. I will support Dr. Henry's point. I also wish to add that if the Attorney General um, has whatever information with regards to the opposition's involvement, why is it that he hasn't made it public? That's one. Two, um, we are on record. We are on record saying to all Guyanese, because we represent over 218,000 in the national assembly. And we have been saying to our Guyanese, one, it is your right to be vaccinated. We are not on record forcing our people. We have gone to communities. We went into regions, even phone calls. We have persons coming in as the leader of the opposition office, and we have been sharing information with regards to the vaccination, the little that we have, because of the government not coming clean with its citizens. One, you cannot visit the ministry's website and get adequate information on the vaccines that are currently available to Guyanese. So because of lack of information, and the good book speaks about it, our people perish for the lack of knowledge. So if there's lack of information with regards to these vaccines, obviously you will have high vaccine hesitancy, and this is what we have seen. Because one is that, don't forget, it was the opposition that discovered on June the 14th, 2021, in the National Assembly, when we were considering financial papers 1 and 2. We discovered through the ask of questions about the procurement of these vaccines. And we were all alarmed how the Sputnik V was actually procured. And what we have said, what we have said to the government then, and will continue to say to them, is that put aside the 200,000 unquestionable vaccines, the Sputnik vaccine, and you can continue to administer the remaining vaccines. But again, we
are on record saying to our people, get vaccinated, but we are not on record saying to our people or trying to force them to get vaccinated. So I just want to add those points based on, in addition to my colleague, Dr. Ed.
Here, if I can come in at this point in time,
Please go ahead.
yeah,
Please go ahead, Dr. Cummings.
I've gotten to, I'm beginning to understand Mr. Nandalal, who thinks that I don't know, the common GOD, who thinks he has all the solutions to all the answers. And I'm beginning to think that whatever, if whatever confronted the issue, he wants to play the blame game. And so I don't think it'll get us anywhere. I won't comment on what you have said. I haven't read it. And I mean, the court, they say sub judice, so it's in the courts, and so I don't want to get involved in that. But what I do know is that the rotation system, the public servants are mostly comprised and made up of one particular race, one particular ethnic, and that's the Afro-Guyanese. And so, when you are in government, we ensure that we had a rotation system, whereby so many days, hello,
Go ahead, Dr. Cummings.
yes, so many days we come to work, we work from home, we accommodate the persons to make sure that the work is done, monitored, the particular public servant, and make sure that they give account of their stewardship at the end of the week. And so it had this lax flexibility that they could have worked from home, thus trying to contain this virus. And so right now, there's not no kind of rotation system. You can work from home, you're asked to come to work, and then when you come to work, if you don't come to work, it's supposed to show the PCR test, even though the Occupational Health and Safety rule says that if the Ministry of Health wants you to, they're requesting a test mitigation, fine, quit the bill. You can't expect these public servants who have got no decent pay to expect them to put the bill of the PCR test, which costs almost $100 every 3 days. That's impossible. And so I also alluded to when I gave my opening remarks, spoke about the National Task Force and the inability to cater for the welfare of the citizens, of the welfare workers. Development, dying in an oil-rich country, one in one, development must not only increase in wealth and businesses, but it must include the welfare of the people. We are the people. What is there for the people? Huh? When we were in government, we had transportation service. When they leave work, we had a particular transportation service. Of course, we had problems with going to minibuses, people with discrimination, and so forth. So we ensure that we had transportation for these persons who less comfortable home. All right. So no rotation system. All right. And in addition to that, talking about inequities, access to vaccines. I recall going up with the same as a nurse when the nurse coming from the United States, we would have given the Kamala Harris the vaccine and administered it to her. Police stopped us, and the police stopped us, and afterwards we let him know who we were, and he was we tried to encourage people to take the vaccines and so forth. And he was saying, lo and behold, he got his first vaccine. And when he go for the second vaccine, it wasn't there. And we have gotten complaints also that, for instance, in AP and UAFC areas, where, for instance, in Linden, if there are 200 persons need the vaccine, like second dose or so forth, when it's being given, it's only one or two, so half of the amount is being sent there. So there's some inequity in terms of that. So, so what I'm saying in short is that those we take into account the socioeconomic status, and we're being deprived. We're having a we're being wrong change, the bad end of the stick in terms of what particular race. And we have seen that in the COVID-19 cash branch. We've seen it in the rollout of flood relief. If you're not in a particular party, you can't get some relief. And so where are we going? Where is the mature politics? Where is the unity that we talk about? Huh? We can't talk about being self-centered in our mouth. Huh? The same gospel we preach to others, but we must be prepared to be the one that we're living by. And so that's just to some extent, right? Because of how we are being treated by this government, all right? as well as the inequities in terms of access to the vaccine. That I would say that's responsible for the high rise in the unfamiliar race. But I still would like to see the data so I can have our own, we can have our own analysis. If you imagine data, they lead to crime. And when you ask surveillance officers, when you ask persons, they are scared to give the information because they most times they have forgotten and they're scared of the jobs, they lose their job. Where are we going? Where are we going? Health doesn't have politics. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cummings. I see Sean Emperor has a follow-up question. Sean, go ahead.
Yes, questions for both Dr. Cummings and Dr. Henry. I'll go with Dr. Henry first. Dr. Henry, I would like your take as a former Minister of Education. The current Minister of Education stance of just consulting with parents and teachers on the reopening of schools. And this is by our own words and confession that was on the news, right? Because she was quizzed by reporters, right? And our previous statement too that the GTU is Curtis McDonald's party and they want to be political, so she would not consult with the union. And we have since seen a withdrawal by the union in assessing schools for reopening. And the minister said that she did consult with the teachers, and the majority of teachers favored face-to-face learning. Um, what is your stand on the position of the minister going the route of talking to parents and teachers, excluding the union, who have a vital say and represent teachers across the country? And secondly, do you favor the model used by that Jamaica will be using, that after they would have vaccinated children 12 between 12 and 18, to reopen school for face-to-face learning after 2 weeks, 2 weeks after they were vaccinated, or they would have received 1 dose? And for Dr. Cummings or Dr. Henry, we would have seen the push for the reopening of school by the Ministry of Education says that that advice is coming from Cabinet and the Ministry of Health. But then we will see yesterday that the health Dr. Frank Anthony confirming that yes, the Delta variant is here and there is an upsurge in cases and deaths and hospitalization. And persons who are instructed to isolate themselves at home, but yet we see a push to reopen school. What are your take on this?